In this session, I'm going to lead you through a short practice in thinking about composition while we make our beautiful Zentangle. So I'm going to use a pencil, a Micron 01 and a tortillon. And in this session, I've just randomly chosen a couple of patterns. One that we're going to use is bales. These are very simple, straightforward grid patterns. I'm also going to use the pattern well, that although it looks a little complicated, it is very easy and beautiful. And when I think about composition, I can do it in the regular Zentangle method. So I'm going to start with 4 dots and think about 4 things I'm grateful for. I'm going to join those dots. And now I no longer have a blank card. I'm going to add a string, and this time I'm going to think about composition, and so I'm going to work with a different string than a grid, but use the same patterns. For this grid, I'm going to make kind of like a V. I'm going to start at the middle there, come down to the bottom, and go up just about to the top. And then I'm going to make a string cut across. So instead of making a regular grid, I'm making a wonky grid. And then for this one, I'll just make a half circle going like this. Yours can be any type of string, but if you can put a V and a arc, I think that will give you a good base to work from. And we're going to start with the pattern bales. And we see here it's a grid pattern, and on the grid we make nice little flower petals. And so I'm going to make that on the grid that I've made here. I'm going to start at the left, take a breath, roll your shoulders, and we're going to relax and just enjoy the beautiful petals that appear. I think what I'm going to do is I am going to trace my string. Normally we think of a string as a window rather than a door in terms of we can work through it. But in this case, I'm actually going to use my string as part of my pattern. So I'm just going to trace over that. And I'm going to continue on making my bales pattern. As you can see, it is starting to get wonky a little bit. I'm going to start with my verticals, and then I'm going to add in my horizontals. So we start seeing it. Yes, it is a similar pattern, but it's going very wonky. And what this does in terms of composition, this gives us contrast in size. If we make a grid in a regular square, that will give us all similar sizes. But here we see we've got some big petals, some small petals, and already that's giving us some nice variation. I can make some choices at this time. I think what I might want to do is make another petal that shoots out of one place, comes to the top because I had an empty space in there. And then I think I'm going to join these two together because that will help move the eye around when we don't have too many disruptions of spaces. And I think the last place I'm going to join is with a nice rounded curve, and I'm going to join these two up. So when I'm thinking about composition, I am thinking about size, shape, and I'm going to join these two up, and placement. So in terms of placement, I've got a nice filled in the bottom, and I can see that again in the top I've got it nice and filled, but with a variation of shape. So that's one way you can think about composition, is by varying the shape from small, medium, and large. We see we've got some large petals here, got some medium petals here, and then we've got some small petals here. And we will repeat this idea with the pattern well. So now that we've got a nice base to work with, I would like to add some pieces to create some more interest within the spaces, and I'm going to choose this pattern well. And again, it might turn out a little bit wonky and different sizes, only because now our spaces are triangular instead of square. So I'm going to start with my big one, and with well, we're going to start with a circle in the center. We're going to start from one of the corners, and we come around the little circle. Then I'm going to start from the other corner, and again I'm going to come under and around, and then the last corner I'm going to come under and around. I'm going to continue that pattern in the triangles I have here. We've started with a big one. This one I think will turn out about medium because it's in a medium space. Again, I'm going from the corner, under and around, from the corner, under and around. I have another triangle here. I'm going to do the same. And taking a breath and just enjoying the lines that are appearing. Your lines may look different than my lines, and that is the way it's supposed to be. You are a different person than me. I'm just facilitating the movement and the placement of what you might consider. So now we've got things that look fairly flat because we've got almost the same space between lines. And so another way in thinking about composition is thinking about contrast in space. Sometimes lines are very close spaced together and some are very far apart. Here we've got lines that are similarly spaced apart, and it's hard to tell the well from the bales. So for the well, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add some nice thin lines in each of the sections. I'm going to come from the center and I'm going to come out into each one of those little triangles. So now we're creating contrast by making these lines nice and thin and coming from the center out to the edge of that well. The other thing this will do is make that center dot very dark because I'm tracing it a lot, and your lines can be as thick or as thin as you prefer. But now we're starting to see some contrast in terms of thinner spaced lines and thicker spaced lines. So I'm going to go on to my next well and I'm going to do the same thing. I can put them even closer together, and that will create even more contrast because now I've got lines that are spaced far apart and I've got lines that are spaced very close together. Just taking our time and bringing it from the center down. And I think what's happening is because I'm going around that dot so much, it's actually turned, I've actually colored this one in. And that's okay too. Again, it will just add some contrast between a little open dot and a closed dot. So when we're thinking about composition, we do want to think a little bit about contrast, and we also want to think about this idea of repeating patterns in various places. by bringing this pattern about in various places on this card, it brings about something very pleasing to your eye because it just moves from one to the other. And so I actually might choose at this point to color in the dots that are around my center one. So that again will give me some contrast. I'm just drawing those nice little lines. All the way out and in each of the sections of these little triangles. Again, if your hand is tight, just loosen it up. This is a relaxing practice where you can free your mind. There are no mistakes, only creative opportunities. So I see that I've got some dots now. I'm going to repeat that idea of the dot in a center of my flower part here. Got two there. I've got another one that is kind of starting here. And so now I've got some spaces on the outside. I see that I've got like another piece going here. So just to even it out, I'm just going to continue a couple of those, and I'm just going to bring it out a little bit. So again, I'm just trying to tidy it up in terms of making the piece flow together. And so I've added some little pieces on the outside that's here where they cross over. Here's another crossover. And so as I'm working, I see that I've got these three on the outside. I'm going to leave it as three because working in odd numbers helps again move the eye around, 3s, 5s. And so even in terms of the flowers, we've got 1, 2, and almost 3 flowers starting. So that's a nice number to work with. I see that I've got 4 or an even well in there. So again, to even it out, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw some lines out. And these ones I'm just going to kind of vary the length, but drawing them very thin so that I can round out my shape. I see that I've got another space at the top that I might want to round out some lines. And when it gets close to the center, I'm just making them smaller, and I think I'll do that on the other side as well. So again, I'm just rounding out my shape so that it will have a nice square look to it. So I think I will do that on this side too. Again, I'm just varying the length so that when it comes into the little part there, it is smaller so they fit. And as it extends, I'm making them larger. I keep rotating my tile because I'm looking for balance. I see that I've got like some nice shape going there, but we've got some empty space here. So I am going to think about, again, some of those lines. And so I'm just going to draw some of those lines so they lead a little bit out of the picture, and these lines are a little bit curvy. Sometimes they're shorter. And I think as I get into more space, I can make them a little bit larger. So they're very thin again. And this is an idea of I'm mirroring, or I'm adding more of these kind of thin lines. So we've got some thin lines in the center. And we've got some thin lines on the outside. And then I'm going to add in some little tipple, sometimes adding a third pattern. Again, that idea of threes is nice. And I think I'm going to have these little tipples coming out of the shape in a nice little way and kind of curving out and getting out into the air. So now that I've placed those there, I need to mirror that to bring some nice balance. So I think I'll put a few in here and in the other corner. So I've got a nice little pile of tipple, which are just little ovals. And then I'm going to have them kind of escape and kind of make the spaces a little bit bigger. They're going to escape down that way. We've got something nice balance there. So now let's think about what those tipple might look like here. And it might just be something small coming out of this nice little triangle space and floating off into the distance in a couple of directions. And so again, bringing balance to the shape. I've got some of these tipples that are close together, and then as they go further out, they get a little bit smaller. Might want to add just some random little tipples. We're going to balance it out. And I'm putting these in groups of 3. Again, 3s and 5s are something nice. And so now we can think about framing it. So I'm going to, you can leave it as is, or I'm going to just kind of draw in a frame because that's what I think. But I'm going to skip over the areas that they have that tipple that I can't really draw a frame through. And I'm just going to draw a little bit of a wonky frame. And kind of contain most of my picture where I can. But I'm just kind of skipping those areas that I've already got something drawn in. So we've got a nice little frame. And now these lines are all similar, so I'm going to double these up. So I'm going to aura so that our frame will have a little bit more weight to it because now it is a double frame. And aura just means to place another line beside it. And again, they don't have to be with a ruler. This is a wonky card thinking about that composition. And so when we're thinking about composition, we are thinking about variations in size. We're thinking about repeating the pattern in a variety of ways. And we're thinking about that idea of line, that sometimes lines are further spaced apart. Other times lines are very close together to give that idea of contrast. And then when we think about shading, shading also gives us that idea of contrast. So I want my flower petals to stand on top. So that means anything behind it is shaded because it's casting a shadow underneath. So I just simply draw my pencil lines inside these areas and a little bit going on the outside because we want our flower petals, which are a wonky bales, to sit on top of things. And so this is a very simple shading. I'm going to use a tortillon or a shader. You can use a Q-tip if you have it. If you have a tissue, you can use it. Even your finger works in cases. So we're starting to see that our flower is now popping. So when we're thinking about composition, shading can have a big effect in bringing about that contrast that I've been talking about. Contrast in line, contrast in shape. That this shading now gives us another level of contrast to have our shape or shapes separated in some way. So we see that that has really popped, and you can work on shading a lot. You can blend it out more. You can add more if it's not enough. You can add some shading to the little dots that are out here, some little shadows just with your tortillon and what's left of there. And you can just keep blending and playing with that a bit. And the last thing to do is to appreciate and take gratitude for your practice and decide which way is up and which way is down. I think I'm going to keep this as my down, but you may choose something different. And you're going to place your initials, however you make them, somewhere on your card. Take a breath and have some gratitude for the practice you worked on today.